Camp ended a couple of days ago. The equipment and the gear is put away, packed into the trailer. The cabins were emptied out and cleaned. The campfire went cold again, waiting for another summer to come around next year. And every year after the noise dies down, I spend some time thinking about what happened. This year, one thought kept coming back to me. We spend a lot of our lives believing other people are wrong. Wrong politically, wrong as parents, wrong as bosses, wrong as employees, wrong as neighbors. But what if they're simply sitting at a different chair? Imagine 6 people sitting around a campfire. Every person believes they're seeing reality. You have the camper. You have the JC, junior counselor. You have the nurse. Maybe you have a parent. The adult director, the youth director. Maybe it's an adult chaperone. None of them are lying. They're just seeing their version of the truth. Because perspective isn't the same as truth, but perspective usually explains behavior. The camper sees the campfire as a place where people gather, sing songs, play games, act out skits. The JC sees it as a place where they are responsible for their cabin, sitting on the benches. They're responsible to entertain the camp for an hour and a half. They are responsible to sing songs, lead songs, participate in the melodrama. The nurse sees it as a place where somebody can get burned. Somebody can trip on a rock. Somebody can fall on the stage. The adult counselor might see it as another stop on the day's responsibility list. A place where the JCs are going to be on stage a lot, and they're going to have to be responsible for the campers more. And just like that, different perspectives of the same reality. The last campfire camp is at the main campfire auditorium, stadium. It's a bunch of wood benches. And we don't always get a campfire there because a lot of times it's too dry, or we're in upper camp or lower camp. But that campfire was an amazing campfire. It was a great campfire. Probably the best campfire that was made at camp this year. And that's just from my perspective. But where the junior counselors saw it, some of our graduating seniors saw it as their last campfire. And so it goes at camp, and perspectives, and the different views of the same world, and how it all ties together. And what do we do with those views? Well, when you're a king and you have a kingdom to manage, try to understand the different views. We had a lot of those at camp this year, especially with some of our older campers, some of our older cabins. We even had many homesick campers this year where they just saw the world differently than their adult counselor in the cabin or the junior counselor in the cabin. Some of the campers would think that they were being unfairly treated. They would go to camp just to hang out with their friends, have a good time. Maybe a boyfriend and girlfriend think they can escape into some privacy. But that doesn't happen at camp. It's not allowed. But from their perspective, it's just fine. And so maybe when they're called out on it, they think that they're being unfairly targeted. When in reality, somebody's just enforcing the rules. But are those rules being enforced equally across the board? We have our adults who are responsible for 110 campers for 5 days and 4 nights. The weight of that alone is enough to skew a perspective of reality. An adult sees it as responsibility. Junior counselors see it as responsibility for other people's children. Not to just ensure that they have a good week, a fun week, but also a safe week, that they are returned home in as good or better condition than they come to camp. A lot of the parents, when they're dropping off the kids, don't really see camp. And it always surprises me. There's always an opportunity to walk around camp and engage with the staff, junior staff, adult staff. Take a look at where the kids have spent the last week. And so few do. Why is that? Perhaps their perspective is that we know camp is safe. We've seen the YouTube video. We don't need to see it firsthand. Maybe the kid wants to show them something. Hard for me to say. Because everybody thinks that their problem is the biggest problem when they're sitting around that campfire. Because that's the chair that they're sitting in. And you know, it happens everywhere. I can relate it back to camp because it just came from camp. But it happens at home, in a marriage. The difference of perspectives between a discussion or a disagreement. Is the dress blue or is it black? It happens in businesses, with partners especially. When they're not on the same page, not rowing in the same direction. Or they see a goal and they have a different idea of how to reach that goal. Different idea how to communicate with a client or a colleague. Or maybe they just don't communicate with a client or a colleague. Again, it's the same job. We may be building the same building, looking at the same set of plans, with the same people. But we may see it differently because of our interactions with those people. It gets skewed based on past behaviors. But do we ever take a moment to look at ourselves from their eyes? Do we ever try to see their side of the problem or their side of the issue? Politics are a hot button topic in the United States right now, aren't they? You either are or you aren't. And there's not a lot of room for middle ground anymore, it doesn't seem. See it in our friendships. That difference of perspective, trying to see it from their side of the chair. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that I don't want to carry the friendship. Well, if you don't, who will? Maybe from your friend's perspective, they're just lost in life. They're so overwhelmed that they have not made the time to make you a priority. Does that mean that they don't care about you? Maybe the role's reversed. Does it mean you don't care about them? Usually not. We just get busy. We just get lost in life. You could say the same thing about our families. As we get older, we tend to drift away from the ones we love the most. Not out of desire to be farther away from them, but simply out of growing as individuals in our own families. Find myself spending less time with my brothers and dad than I did before. Find myself spending less time with my own kids than I did before. Of course, they're moved out now. They have their own families, they have their own lives. Maybe they just don't want to come around as often, which I don't know that I could blame them for that. I made plenty of mistakes in my parenting days of raising them, but I like to think they're not so grave that they don't want to come around anymore. I choose to think that they're just busy. That life has got them going every which direction. Not that they don't love me, not that I don't love them. Because it's the same world we're on. It's the same picture we're looking at. You know, maybe it's an employee, if you have employees, or maybe it's your boss at work. Maybe they're thinking that their boss just doesn't appreciate them. Maybe the boss is thinking that they don't realize what's required to keep everybody employed. Maybe in the same business, you have a customer that thinks they're overcharging for everything. But the contractor in that same business says you don't see insurance, payroll, permits, equipment. You don't see all the costs associated with it. And in that business, in that dichotomy, everybody can be right. And everybody can believe that they're right. And to some extent, they are. But the better question is not necessarily who's wrong, but maybe the better question is why would somebody believe what they believe? And this goes into the introspection of yourself, of who you're talking to, reading the room, reading the people in it. Why would they believe that? Why would they say that? Why would they feel that way? Trying to get inside somebody else's head is a skill. To understand it from their perspective is something that benefits the person trying to get in there and understand it immensely. If you can see a problem through your counterpart's eyes, if you can acknowledge it, try to understand what they're feeling and thinking about it, you instantly put yourself in a power of strength. We wouldn't look at it and think, are they right? We wouldn't look at it and think, do I agree with them? The more powerful way to look at it and to ask the question of, how did they get there? Understanding somebody else's perspective is powerful. It is intelligence. So easy it is to jump to conclusions. They just don't know. They don't like me. How many times have you heard that or thought that? They don't like me, so they're not going to listen to what I have to say. When in reality, a lot of the times couldn't be farther from the truth. Now, there are exceptions. I 1,000,000% believe there are exceptions. There are people who don't like you. They go out of their way to make your life miserable. They're out there. They exist. But just because they are doesn't mean that you need to be as well. The emotional reaction is what gets us in trouble. The thoughtful reaction is what positions us in a manner of being able to operate from a higher path, a position of strength. And that's where we want to operate from. We want to take the emotion out of it. Know who you're dealing with. Know who your counterpart is. If you're always being the bad guy and your partner always gets to be the hero, that can wear you out. But they're looking at the same problem from a different perspective. Generally, it's because people are different. If you're that type A, organized, disciplined personality, and you're dealing with somebody who's disorganized and doesn't have that same discipline, when you both look at an individual who is creating a problem for whatever the topic might be at the time, you're going to get different reactions. You're going to get different perspectives of how to deal with it. If you're that structured person, you're going to want to deal with it immediately. You're going to want to shut it down. You want to get the person causing the disruption into line. There are rules. They need to be followed. There is no gray area. Where if you're the other person, you just want to be their friend. You're that type of person who, I don't want to hold anybody accountable. Yeah, there's rules, but they don't really apply. We can look past this one or that one. And they're looking at the same thing and dealing with it completely differently. And I've seen it. I just saw it multiple times over the last month. Between work, family, camp, they all see the same things. But their interpretation of what the problem or lack thereof might be is completely different. And when you understand somebody, sometimes it feels like you're agreeing with them, right? I understand where they're coming from. Oh, that feels icky. Oh, that feels gross. I can't do that. Just because you understand them doesn't mean you agree with them. And that's the key. Just because you understand them doesn't mean you agree with them. You simply see it from their perspective. And that understanding is what allows you to make informed decisions. You know the argument that's going to come back at you before it comes back. You can predict it. You can see it coming. And when you can see it coming, it's easy to avoid. You know the trap what not to walk into. You know the trap not to walk into. You know what not to say. Because you already know what their counter argument's going to be. You've already planned for what could blow back on you. And again, that is a position of strength in any discussion, in any situation. It doesn't mean that you approve of their thought process. It doesn't mean approving of them as people, as individuals. You can understand why somebody lies, but you can still reject the lying. Just because you understand it doesn't mean you condone it. You can understand why somebody's angry, and you can still hold them accountable. Because understanding is not surrender. It's wisdom. And that is the crux of what we've been talking about here lately. Wisdom. I'm 51 years old. It's taken me this long to figure it out. Learn from me. But the hardest chair to sit in around that campfire is the one that you refuse to sit in. That chair where you talk about criticism. Because it's easy to judge. It's harder to imagine carrying somebody else's responsibilities. The one that you refuse to sit in is the most difficult chair because you simply cannot wrap your head around their thoughts. You cannot understand them, or maybe you just don't want to understand them. And those are the ones that are usually the most important to figure out how to understand. Because you've given up your control of yourself to somebody else at that point. You refuse to understand them. You refuse to sit in their chair. You refuse it to see from their perspective. They are such a terrible person that you cannot for a moment put yourself into their shoes to try to feel what they feel, to try to understand what they see. But that's the difference between being a builder and being a taker. If you're trying to build something, those chairs are exactly the ones that you want to sit in. They're the ones that you want to understand because it helps you make the right decisions, the best decisions for you, your family, your community. And as a decision maker, eventually you're going to become misunderstood. Your decisions will affect lives. And somebody's going to stop seeing their chair. They're going to start looking at your chair. Why does that person make those decisions? Why does that person think that way? Why does that person vote that way? Why does that person feel that way? Easy to criticize. Easy to judge. But if you're trying to understand somebody else's perspective from their chair, you might have a leg up. So this week, before assuming somebody is selfish, ask, what chair are they sitting in? What responsibilities do they have? What information do they have that I don't? Or maybe what pressure are they carrying that I can't see? And yeah, you might still disagree. At the end of the day, you might not like them any more than you did at the start of the day. But at least you'll understand. And that understanding is power. It is where the wisdom begins. It is where the strategy starts. Everything begins with understanding. Know who you're dealing with. Understand who that person is. Try. And even if it's just a little, you may learn 10% about their 100%. But that 10% that you learn will make a difference. Let's get a royal decree for you on this one. Never confuse a different perspective with a lack of character. Never confuse a different perspective with a lack of character. What does that mean? It means every person sees the world from the chair they're sitting in. 6 or 7 people around that campfire looking at the same campfire. All of them seeing something different. Being wise isn't about abandoning your convictions. It's not about changing your own tune. What it is being willing to sit in somebody else's chair long enough to understand how they arrived at their thought, at their opinion, at their decision. And you don't have to stay there. Jump in and jump out. But if you've never looked from another seat, you probably don't see the entire campfire. Thank you for joining me for this podcast. I hope you liked it. This is King Roberto coming to you from the King's Lair. on the King's Court podcast. Because when you're the king, everything's about the king. If you like this and it reaches out to you, speaks to you, share it with somebody. Let's get some more listeners on this thing. You want to reach out to me? Find me on email, Twitter, X, whatever you want to do. And remember, that campfire that's burning bright in front of you, it's burning bright in front of somebody else too. Try to see that from their side of the campfire. And I will see you or talk to you next week. Goodbye.